Hi everyone, my name is Azhar Nurgaliyeva. I know a bit of a difficult surname, but it's fine. I'm here to present our work on diversity awareness and representation in energy publications, and I'm working on this together with Ananda Gopalan, who couldn't be here today because he's recently relocated to Singapore, and Anna Kaur, who also couldn't be here today because she's currently preparing for a very important interview. So let's wish her some luck. So yeah. So this is briefly the outline for today, but before we start, for any new members and in general for a recap from last year, I want to cover that the main motivation for this activity is essentially analyzing whether there is any underrepresentation gaps within the energy sector research and whether we can analyze these sort of gaps and see if there are any risks that potentially create biases for decision making and limit research progress in our community. So the main objectives for us, first of all, is data collection, because as you might all be aware, in our day and age, collecting data could be quite tricky at times. So within the equality, diversity, and inclusion factors, it becomes a bit more tricky. So this is the main aspect of it. But second is also analyzing whether there's any certain patterns within the gender aspect that we could take a look at. The reason we're narrowing down it to gender aspect is because, again, collecting the data was a tricky part of this project, so we decided to narrow down the problem to something a bit easier, in a way. So if you remember from last year, our previous focus was on mostly UK-based publications, and we focused mostly just like on getting all of the titles across different journals and try to enrich that data by getting different impact metrics, such as citations of the authors, how many times the research have been mentioned, how much it was used, and see if we could classify the names of the authors according to their genders, and see if we could get some initial patterns from there. Going from that kind of foundational basics, we decided to expand our data set to a few more countries, such as Canada, USA, Germany, France, Singapore, South Africa, and Switzerland. From there, we decided to do comparative analysis between different kind of regions and see if there is any early observations in sectoral focus and any biases that we could see. So here are the journals that we're currently looking at, and the reason they were chosen is because they give us quite an overview of several energy disciplines. So the first four were previously in the dataset last year as well. We just expanded them to 7 more regions. 2 solar energy materials and energy policy were newly added in order to also cover kind of new disciplines in a way. But we skipped transport for porous media this year. And the reason for that was basically the data source was different from all the other journals, and it became a bit more problematic to try to expand it to other regions because for some of them it simply did not have any publications, so it was kind of skewing all of the data. So going into kind of initial analysis, similarly to UK trends across all of the other regions, women mostly represent a quarter of all the first authors in the dataset. However, that trend changed when we tried to look at all of the authors. And initially, when we tried to look at it, we started thinking, okay, does this mean that there is a certain barrier for women in being kind of leading researchers in certain publications? However, it's also important to note that for some of these countries, the pattern might not exactly suggest that. It might suggest the fact that the classification algorithm simply has certain limitations when it comes to non-Western names. So in particular, we looked at some of the Singaporean name classifications, and we noticed that it's more accurate to predict the gender of first authors than all the consecutive corresponding authors. And part of the reason is also because usually first author is affiliated with a university within that country, so they might have some connection to that specific country or the background, but corresponding authors could be from all over the world. And this is why this chant might not particularly be the best way of judging it. Encouragingly, we can see that over the years, if we look at all of the data from all of these countries, there is an increase in female first authorship rate. It is very slight, very slight, but still going there. Ignore the 2025 lower now. There's simply not enough publications at the moment, but we're going for it. There is a slow lump in 2012 and 2013, but yeah, we're improving in the recent years. However, in general, it's the case that male first author papers get cited on 7% more often than female papers. But our first look at it is, it might be simply because there's many more publications that are published with male authors. So we're currently doing another analysis where we're trying to group the authors by their kind of age index, which in a way is a representation of kind of similar career stage in a way, but they're not inconclusive yet, so. And once we started looking at other countries, we also noticed that there are certain kind of regional preferences or research focuses across the publication titles. So for example, France and South Africa are more likely to be published in the International Journal of Hydrogen Energy, or for example, I think it was Switzerland, Singapore, and Germany are more likely to contribute to solar energy materials, whilst UK, USA, and Switzerland actually as well are more likely to publish in the energy policy. So it might highlight that in general, different countries have different strategic priorities on how they contribute to these kind of publication titles. It might also indicate that different researchers have kind of different research backgrounds or interests, but yeah, so far it's looking interesting. But the one that we found quite good is the representation of USA publications. As you can see, they're quite equal across all of the publication titles compared to all the other countries. Interesting trend here as well is that we can see that some of the countries tend to publish much more. For example, Germany. I personally did not know that Germany publishes that much, but which is not the case for some of the other countries like South Africa or Singapore. And the one thing that we were also looking into is kind of seeing how the regional patterns are different on how the research is being utilized. So when it comes to citations, it's pretty much equal across all of the regions. I think the underrepresented ones are mostly from Singapore and South Africa, and I think, and Switzerland. When it comes to the usages, the UK predominantly, it's very dominant compared to all of the countries, which suggests that the research from UK researchers tends to be downloaded and viewed much more than for all of the other following publications. For mentions and captures, it's pretty much similar as well, although Germany again here and the UK are taking leading roles. And for social media engagement, surprisingly enough as well, Germany actually has a higher rate here compared to all of the other countries, following by the UK. So from these kind of impact metrics, what we noticed is that it looks like UK and Germany are, the research from these countries is predominantly used by the scientific community, whereas other regions tend to kind of the research from these other regions tend to be less utilized. We're still continuing our exploration and try to dig deeper into any other gender biases. However, one thing that we struggled with is when you're expanding to more regions, you start to notice that gender classification accuracy falls down significantly, simply because the algorithm cannot handle some of the non-Western names, which is why the data aspect actually becomes more critical, and especially the data accuracy, which is why part of the reason we have reached out, I think, to a few people in the room as well. If you know any interesting data sources that could be related to this research and could be useful for us to take a look at, that would be super appreciated. So yeah, or if you can suggest any other gender classification tools, that would be also good. This is one of the next steps for us. Further explore impact metrics differences within different dimensions, as well as see if we could refine the gender classification, because we're aware that it's not perfect. There are other methods out there who might be, which might outperform what we have at the moment. And yeah, and we're lacking certain level of representation, which initially we did on purpose to narrow down the problem and simplify it. But we're also aware that we have to stay unbiased and try to see if we could mitigate that. And last but not least, it would be also quite interesting to see if there is a way to map all of the researchers that we have in our data set by their collaboration networks, because we believe that one of the main aspects within how researchers kind of work together is their collaboration networks. So yeah, thank you.